Skip Weber at Weber Chevrolet.
You can say you have the best price, and we do. You can say you have the best selection, and we do. But people don't sit there with a notepad writing down prices. They look at the spokesperson and say, is this somebody that I can do business with? Is this somebody I can relate to? And that's why a lot of people hire spokespeople that are popular. And then there was a big debate that I had with my dad. I always loved radio, and I could say much more. That's when he really drilled the philosophy. And he says, yes, but they cannot see you. That's why I do the ad like this. I mean, if you and I can talk about everyday life and people can see that I'm not somebody that lives in a high castle, that I have the same problems and the same issues and the same challenges every day, we are in for the customer because we are alike. We put the customer first because we want to be put first when we're customers somewhere else. It's all about relatability, and we're going to be trustworthy. We are as much of your friend as we are your salespeople.
Weber Chevrolet, Granite City, Columbia, Illinois, 11270, and online at WeberChevrolet.com.
The J.C. Corcoran Podcast.
Was an old farmer who lived by a rock, sat in the meadow, was shaking his fist at some boys who were down by the creek, feet in the water, their hands on their marbles and playthings. And in days of yore, they met a young maiden. She looked like a pretty young creature. She sat on the grass, pulled up her dresses to show us her ruffles and laces with the white fluffy duck. Said she was learning a new way to bring up her children and teach them to knit, while the boys in the barnyard were shoveling refuse and litter from yesterday's hunt, while the girl in the meadow was rubbing her eyes at the boys just like girls sometimes do, to make it quite clear that she wanted to go for a nice pleasant stroll on the grass and hurry back home for a nice piece of ice cream and cake that stood 3 layers tall. After dessert, she was ready to go for another walk down by the dock. But then a young man with a sizable roll of 100s and a big bulge up front, he'd ask politely she'd show him her little pet dog that was subject to fits. He'd reach on over, grab hold of her small tender hands with the movement so quick. She'd bend on over and suck on his soda so sweetly till she finished it, and pull down her panties to rub on her hip that she bruised as she ran down the halls. Cause he tried to force her to lick on his candy so tasty made of butterscotch, and then he spread whipped cream all over her cookies that she had been baking all night. If you think this is dirty, you're well right.
No, I'm just getting warmed up.
This is something we call the Sunday Showgram. I'm J.C. Corcoran, and what we do on this show, as opposed to Saturday nights from 6 until 9 o'clock when we play music, on Sunday morning we tell old war stories. So when I say war, I'm talking about the war behind the scenes at concerts, comedy shows, movie junkets, just whatever happened in this business or in related businesses. I have accumulated stories over the years, and we throw them at you for 2 hours every Sunday morning right here on News Talk STL. I'll give you a for instance, all right, right off the top. It was on this date back in 1980. The Eagles are becoming sort of politically active, and they were on the Democratic side, and there was a Democratic senator by the name of Alan Cranston, and Alan Cranston was running for re-election, and the Eagles sort of got behind him because they dug his act, and so they're doing a big concert, a big fundraiser, a big benefit thing, and they got a large crowd there, and they bring Alan Cranston, who is a very elderly-looking man pretty much his entire life. I mean, when he was 30, he looked like he was 75. But they bring him on stage, and he's wearing a suit and everything. Looks like a narc. And but the Eagles are behind this guy, all right? And they're basically bringing him out on stage to say, hey, look, we're raising money for this guy's campaign. He's got a good agenda, and we really like the guy, and please vote for him. Let's bring out Alan Cranston. They bring him out. And for whatever reason, Glenn Frey became irritated because he thought that Don Felder, one of the other guys in the band, obviously, he thought that Don Felder had made a disparaging remark about Alan Cranston while Alan Cranston was on stage trying to make a speech. And Glenn Frey went over these two guys basically got into a fight on stage. I have to tell you, there's a very, very funny clip that I have somewhere in my archives where I was interviewing Glenn Frey, and it was a satellite interview. All right, so they're sitting in L.A., I'm sitting in St. Louis. They see me on a TV screen, I see them on a TV screen, and they say, 3, 2, 1, go, boom. And you start asking questions. Now, he was paired with a guy by the name of Aries Spears, a comedian that for years you saw on Mad TV, and they put together a television show called SOS, South of Sunset. It was one of these buddy movies. It was on the heels of Beverly Hills Cop. And so they're thinking, set up the series in Los Angeles, very flashy stuff, real good backgrounds, location shoots and everything like that, and get a white guy and then get a black guy and put them on television together, call it South of Sunset. Boom, we're in business. So the satellite picture comes up. They count me down. I said to Glenn Frey, I said, other than your last couple of years with the Eagles, have you ever done any acting? And it took him a second or two for it to register. And then Aries Spears just busts a gut. He starts laughing his ass off. And Glenn Frey just says, you're a funny guy. And then we went on with the conversation after that. There's an interesting story behind that show, by the way, South of Sunset. If you're saying to yourself, I don't even remember that. So it's 1993, and they're getting ready to debut this show. It was on CBS. And so, obviously, all throughout the United States of America, you tune to CBS at like 9 o'clock on a Thursday night, and there it is, SOS, South of Sunset. There's only one problem. In Los Angeles, I forget what it was. It was either the riots or wildfires or something. There was just something that forced the local television stations in Los Angeles to cut away from network programming and go completely local. Not unlike what happens in St. Louis when there's a tornado coming at the city and they just basically say, we're sorry, we're cutting into programming here. Here's the radar. Watch the F out. So same things happen in Los Angeles. So basically the entire primetime schedule gets wiped out for this local television news coverage on the local stations in Los Angeles. Well, then there was another problem. After this show aired the first time, the network guys apparently thought it was so awful, just so terrible, that they canceled it after just one show, which meant that South of Sunset, SOS, in Los Angeles, never aired in Los Angeles because the show was wiped out because of the local programming, and then the network canceled the show, and so the show never even aired in L.A. Television can be a tough town. Speaking of L.A., we have a great story. Man, oh man, this is the anniversary in 1969 of the Tate LaBianca murders, the stuff that Charles Manson was behind, and on which the movie by Quentin Tarantino, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, was based, even though Tarantino went to the well one too many times and changed the ending of that movie, too. If you're going to do it one time, fine, in Inglourious Bastards, but you can't come back again and just change history in the next movie too. That sucked. That was a stupid idea, but it was, 98% of the movie is absolutely sensational. It was just a dumb ending. But anyhow, this is the anniversary of the real murders out there in Los Angeles. And that story has a remarkable St. Louis connection, which I'm going to tell you about a little bit later on this hour. Speaking of endings that don't go well, that almost seem like a movie, it was on today's date, August 2nd, back in 1984. And I had been in town for, June, July, just barely 3 months. And I'm doing the morning zoo with the U-Man, and we're just plugging away. and everything sort of seems like it's going pretty well. Now, we talked about this before. When you're looking for a radio job, and I was in Buffalo, New York at the time, and I had lost that job, so I'm just sitting there jerking my gherkin. And what you do is you go to this newspaper that is for the broadcast industry. It's called Radio and Records. It would come out every Friday. You'd get it in the mail. And in the back of this magazine, sort of newspaper thing, you'd go back there, and they had all the job listings for radio stations all over the country. And I had no intention of hanging around Buffalo, so I was very happy to try to get out. So I start scanning these things, and I see one that is called a blind box ad. And like I said, if you've heard this story before, please bear with me. I'll make it short. A blind and I don't know if they have these in other industries. I do know that they have them in the radio industry, or they did back in the day. There aren't any jobs now, so there's nothing to advertise. So oftentimes, the radio station involved didn't want their competitors or really anybody else to know what they were doing. So they would put what was called a blind box ad. And so you would look at this and it would say, Midwest radio station looking for an irreverent, avant-garde morning show. Blah, blah, blah. If this is you, send your tape and your resume to this blind box ad. And so you would prepare your tape, a little 5-minute demo of what your show sounded like, and you'd stuff a resume in the box, and you would send it off, not having any idea where it was going. You would send it to a third party, which was the magazine, and then they would send it to the radio station in question, and nobody had any idea that any of this was going on. And even I didn't know where it was going. So a few weeks later, I get the call from Casey, and they're like, hey, we really liked your stuff. Could you send us a little more? And do you have any TV stuff? And I did. And so I put together another tape, and then I put together a VCR tape of a bunch of TV silliness that we had done in Buffalo, and I sent it along, and boom, I get the job, and we're rocking away, me and the U-Man, for the summer of 1984. Now it is August, and 3 of the bosses say, hey, we'd like to take you to lunch tomorrow. Can you meet us at the Viking down in Crestwood at noon? I'm like, sure. What are we going to talk about? Oh, we'll talk about that when we see you. Okay, fine. I didn't think much of it. Well, you know that scene in Goodfellas where Joe Pesci thinks he's going to be a made man, and he walks into the banquet room and there's nobody there, and he realizes for a split second, oh, I'm going to get whacked, and in fact, they shoot him in the back of the head, and that's it. That's what this seemed like, because I walked into the banquet room at the Viking, there's nobody there, and thought it was a little odd to have that big a room for, wait a minute, what's that? And on the middle of the table, I see a cassette player, and they're like, come on in, sit down. And I'm thinking to myself, what the hell is going on? Well, to make a very long story short, they sit me down and they say, look, JC, we want to play you something. I'm like, all right. And they push the play button, and it was that audition tape, that little 4 or 5 minute tape of what I sent them to get the job. And then they hit the stop button when it was over. And the boss looked at me and he said, this is not what you're doing. We're getting something different. We hired you to do this, and that's not what you're doing. So now I'm sitting there like, oh. And I tried to explain to them, okay, well, yeah, that's what I was doing in Buffalo. When I got here, it was a completely different competitive situation, completely different kind of radio station, even a completely different kind of co-host. And so I figured out early on that what I was doing in Buffalo probably wouldn't work that well here, so I made amendments to my act. I changed some things around, and that's what I'm doing. And don't you think it's going pretty well? And they weren't satisfied with that explanation. And I wouldn't say that it was a tense meeting, but it was uncomfortable. And I remember I went home that afternoon, and I went right back to that magazine, Radio and Records, and I started looking for jobs because I was sure that they were going to whack me. I still remember there was a radio station in Houston, KLOL, that I sent a tape to, and I sent 4 or 5 tapes out that next morning, which is a story in itself, because that day, it was a Friday, And I rapidly, quickly put together a bunch of tapes and resumes because, if you snooze, you lose on these things. If there's an opening in a big radio station in Houston, everybody and their brother is going to send a tape and a resume. And if you don't get yours in really, really quickly, they're just going to pick somebody else, and your tape and resume is going to stay in the pile. They won't even have listened to it. So you got to be quick on these things. So I went to the post office that morning in Kirkwood, and the post office closed at noon. And the time was getting short. And I remember driving really, really fast with about 3 or 4 of these tapes and resume packages that I had put together. And I'm looking at the clock. I'm going, boy, I'm just barely going to make it. And so I am stuck in traffic. I finally get to the post office in Kirkwood. I park. I go running up to the front door, which is glass. You can see inside. And I grab the handle and I pull the door, and it's locked. But I can see into the lobby of the post office, and it's like 11:55. And I'm looking like, guys, you're closed 5 minutes early. And apparently their policy was, we close 5 minutes early because all we can do is finish with the people who are already in the building. And if you let somebody in at 11:56, they're going to be here past noon, and we want to go home. And I don't think that's probably legal, but that's what they did. And so they just sort of waved from across the lobby. I could just barely see them at the other end of the lobby. And they're like, no, they're waving their arms like, no, we're closed. Now, in those days, I used to wear these big old Fry boots. And I think they may have had a steel toe. I'm not sure. But I was so pissed, and I was so upset by the fact that they had closed 5 minutes earlier. I was like, shit. I just said it to myself. And I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I just sort of in frustration, I kicked the door. I didn't even kick it hard. It was just sort of like, oh, damn, like you do sometimes. And I kicked the door, and the glass shattered into a million pieces. And I stood there in just shock and disbelief, and also realizing that I've just damaged federal property. I'm going to probably get arrested, and I'm going to lose my job anyhow, regardless of what had happened at the Viking the day before. I went home, and I damn near just died on the couch. Well, for whatever reason, nobody ever followed up on anything. The cops never came. No charges were pressed. It was like it never happened. To this day, I keep looking over my shoulder. It's like that Seinfeld episode where the guy from the library shows up because Jerry forgot to return a book to the library like 30 years prior. I keep thinking the cops are still going to come after me for this. Well, like I said, the story had a happy ending because nothing ever happened. I went home. For the next couple of weeks, I was just scared to death. And then after a while, you're like, okay, maybe nothing's going to happen here. So the next 6 weeks were really tough because, the radio station was telling me, we didn't hire you to do what you're doing now. We hired you to do what you were doing in Buffalo. You're not doing it. And so things are a little tense here. And for 6 weeks, why 6 weeks? Because it was either the first or second week of October, the very first ratings came in for the station and for our show. The ratings would come out 4 times a year, quarterly. And like I said, it's the first or second week of October, and we had like a 600% increase in listenership on the Morning Zoo. I mean, the ratings almost tripled for me and the U-Man. And guess what? They didn't bother me anymore about that old audition tape from Buffalo. It never came up again. All of this 42 years ago today, and I remember it like it was yesterday. All right, it's time for the weekend pickup. That's how we start the show every Sunday morning here on the Sunday Showgram, a collection of dumb stories you'd probably be better off without, but what fun would that be? Let's go to press. This is a pretty big story. One of the biggest movies of all time is finally going to get a sequel, Home Alone. Now, a lot of the people from the original movie, like Catherine O'Hara and James Hurd, have passed away, but they even told us what the idea is going to be. Kevin McAllister is a widower or a divorcee raising a son by himself. And here's what Macaulay Culkin said. I'm working really hard, and I'm not paying enough attention to my kid, and the kid is getting miffed at me, and then I get locked out. My son won't let me in. End quote. and then they start setting the traps. So going back to that, the house is some sort of metaphor for their relationship, and apparently Disney is kissing Macaulay's butt to make it happen. They're offering him another extra movie on top of that. He could do his own movie, whatever he wants to do. Please just do this Home Alone movie. We'll see. Joe Rogan, highest paid podcaster of the year, I'll say $82 million just this year. Call Her Daddy, the Kelsey Brothers show, New Heights, also doing very well. Alicia Silverstone, and by the way, her name is not Alicia, it's Alicia, all right? And back in the day, she was just incredibly hot, She had that little thing with her mouth or her upper lip or something that made her just unbelievably cute. Then she went off the deep end. And for a number of years while she was raising a young child, and if you're having breakfast right now, I apologize, but what she would do is she got this goofy idea. It sounds like something JFK Jr. had come up with. She would chew the kid's food and then spit it in his mouth like a freaking bird. And there were videos of it too. And you're thinking to yourself, what the hell are you doing? And this kid was, 5, 6, 7 years old, and she was still doing it. So I'm sorry, she has lost her appeal for me. But anyhow, she's going to come back for a Clueless sequel. It doesn't have a date or time yet. Spider-Man, brand new day. Tom Holland back for Spider-Man fans. And I can't write stuff like this. This is like a joke that writes itself. RFK Jr. now has a cooking show on YouTube. More ring-tailed lemur, Mom. 10 women have accused Jared Leto of sexual misconduct in a new documentary. An Upper Deck card featuring Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant is the priciest sports card ever sold, $12.93 million. Now, if you were smart, you'd buy up all the pop culture stuff you can think of that's out there right now, and then wait 20 or 30 years if you're still going to be alive, and then bring it all out and sell it for $1 million. Unfortunately, in 20 or 30 years, $1 million is probably going to be the equivalent of about $1.50. The bombing of Pan Am 103 on Netflix premiering this weekend, a British miniseries based on the true story about their joint investigation with the FBI to hunt down the terrorists who took down a transatlantic flight over Lockerbie, Scotland in 1988. I just finished watching that, 3 or 4 part series about the Moscow, Idaho killings by Brian Koberger. That'll shake you up. Very well done, by the way. I highly recommend it. Michael J. Fox is going to get the Bob Hope Humanitarian Award at this year's Emmys. Aaron Rodgers says his wife gave him permission to play another season. Meanwhile, Tony Romo has got some splaining to do. Peter Dinklage will play Santa in a comedy called Naughty, co-starring Jennifer Aniston as a woman who needs Santa to testify at her divorce hearing. Olivia Wilde is directing. John or Johnny is the most popular male name used in song titles, like Johnny Be Good. Mary, the most popular female name, like in Proud Mary. Meanwhile, David Lee Roth and Alex Van Halen will reunite for a TED Talk in Fargo, North Dakota this weekend. It'll hit YouTube in a couple of weeks. Willie Nelson posted an open letter online urging people to stand up against the construction of data centers in their community. Joe Buck was at the Taylor Swift wedding. He said it was pretty surreal. He ran into Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Scarlett Johansson, Hugh Grant, Tom Hanks, Chris Stapleton, Jennifer Lopez, and Beck, and was there to hear Paul McCartney sing I Want to Hold Your Hand for the first time in 1964. Sources say Robert Downey Jr. is earning $100 million for the 2 upcoming Avengers movies. $100 million, $50 million per picture. Trailer is out for season 4 of Ted Lasso. The Twin Peaks cast will tour the United States later this year through early 2027. Meanwhile, Jon Stewart and Pete Davidson are hosting a comedy benefit to mark the 25th anniversary of 9/11. Dave Chappelle, Bill Burr, Nikki Glaser, more will be announced. Sean Astin says he negotiated such a small salary for Lord of the Rings that he couldn't afford his house in the early 2000s. Said he only made about $250,000 for all 3 movies. Carly Simon has Parkinson's disease. Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes' daughter Suri legally dropped her dad's last name. Prince's Purple Rain is going to open on Broadway in the spring. Oscar Mayer celebrating the 90th anniversary of the Wienermobile this weekend with Wiener cakes. What? They're milk bar cakes with hot dogs around the sides. Yo! They'll be available a few places this weekend. Yeah, a few places like the Trash Can. My daughter received a gift vase of a bunch of gardenias. And gardenias are those real long things. They just look like sticks until they start blooming, and then they bloom, and they're just gorgeous. They're beautiful. But you want them they need to stand up straight, and they have to be very, very erect, which is why maybe somebody discovered that Viagra, when dissolved in water, can make cut flowers stay erect for up to a week longer than they usually would. If you had a choice between instantly getting $50,000 or flipping a coin for a 50% chance to win $1 million, which one would you pick? In a poll, 65% of Americans would take the guaranteed $50,000. That's how bad things are right now. There's a trend called Cyclospora Skinny, with videos on social media about how you can lose weight by intentionally eating the diarrhea lettuce, hoping to contract the parasite. Experts say, don't be stupid. Blue whales, when they're calves, can gain 200 pounds a day every day for the first year of their lives. They can gain 200 pounds a day. That almost happened to me when I was on a cruise. If you're an ostrich, and I'm assuming none of you are, but if you're an ostrich and you're walking around with those giant eyes, it might help to know that an ostrich's eyes are about 2 inches in diameter, which is almost the size of a billiard ball, which means their eyes are bigger than their brains. That also happened to me on a cruise. Thanks to cancel culture, Cracker Barrel's CEO has stepped down. That was the person who tried to change the logo. They changed the logo and people lost their freaking minds. In a new survey, 49% of people would rather inherit nothing at all rather than having to deal with a relative's junk. About 51% would prefer a few select items versus receiving everything from a loved one. We had to do that a couple of times. We had to clean out houses of people that had passed away. It's amazing the amount of crap. People, in my dad's house, we found old canceled checks from like the 70s. Oh, he was holding on to all that stuff. If you would have said something to him about it when he was alive, he was, oh, no, I might need those someday. Earlier this month, a 27-year-old woman in Connecticut was charged with murder, and it was apparently premeditated because earlier that day she Googled, does God forgive murderers? Oops. And the word quarantine comes from the Italian words for 40 days. It dates back to when it was discovered that ships were infested with plague-carrying rats. Sounds like a good name for an alternative band, by the way. And they were forced to wait outside Venice for 40 days before they could come ashore. World's largest recorded turtle was a leatherback that washed up on a beach in Wales in 1988. It was about 100 years old, and it was 9 feet long. It weighed more than 2,000 pounds. It's more than a friggin' Prius. And Ford issued a recall for about 80,000 Ford Explorers and Lincoln Aviators, because the driver's seat may recline unexpectedly. That'll get your attention. The military is doing some major renovations to Navy barracks across the country, which are famous for being just drab and ugly. Anyhow, it could take years, but they're trying to figure out where the sailors could live. They're considering hotels, RVs, and houseboats. Pretty good gig. To what lengths would you go to cancel a marriage? You can just not show up, of course. I talked to a woman once that I sort of knew casually in saying, very, very, very good-looking woman, by the way, very, very handsome female named Robin. And she had gotten married and gotten divorced only a couple of months after the marriage. And I said to her, when did you know the marriage was in trouble? And this was her answer. She said, 6 months before we got married. I said, well, for God's sakes, why didn't you do something? Why didn't you stop? Why didn't you pull out? She said, you know what? These things take on a life of their own. We had already even received lots of gifts, and the hall and the band and everything was paid for, the dress, the whole. I couldn't stop it. I mentioned that because a bride allegedly set fire to the church where she was supposed to get married as a way of backing out of it. Hey, Canadians don't like us anymore. Travel from Canada to the United States down 25%. All right, we have crossed over to the month of August. The NFL preseason kicks off next Thursday. College football gets going on the 29th. The U.S. Open tennis match tournament begins August 30th on TV. New season of Futurama hits Hulu on August 3rd. Season 4 of Ted Lasso on Apple TV on the 5th. Season 4 of Reacher on Prime Video on the 12th. An artificial intelligence system just created a burger recipe that outscored McDonald's Big Mac in a blind taste test. The tool, called Burger AI, was trained on over 2,000 burger recipes and went through billions of possible ingredient combinations. All right, birthdays. Earlier this week, Elizabeth Berkley, Jesse from Saved by the Bell, and of course, Nomi and Showgirls, 54. Lori Loughlin, 62. Sally Struthers, 79. Alexandra Paul from Baywatch, 63. Geddy Lee from Rush, 73. Patty Scalfa, Mrs. Bruce Springsteen, 73. Hope Solo, who just announced that she is selling off a lot of her memorabilia, including her jersey from the Olympics and all that sort of stuff. She turned 45 earlier this week. Jamie Presley, 49. Hilary Swank, 52. Christine Taylor, who played Marsha in the Brady Bunch movies and is married to Ben Stiller, 55. Christopher Nolan, who seems to be doing okay right about this time, is 56. Lisa Kudrow, 63. Anita Hill, not a fan of Clarence Thomas, 70. Arnold Schwarzenegger, 79. William Atherton, you don't know that name, but I guarantee you know who he is. He played the reporter in the Die Hard movies and was the EPA inspector in Ghostbusters. William Atherton, 79. Paul Anka, 85. BJ Novak from The Office and Inglourious Bastards, 47. J.K. Rowling, or Rowling, whatever you prefer, 61. Mark Cuban, 68. And today, your vice president of these here United States is 42. Jimmy Hoffa disappeared on this date 51 years ago. Bruce Jenner won the decathlon gold medal at the Montreal Olympics 50 years ago today. Night Shift with post-Fonz, Henry Winkler and Michael Keaton and Shelley Long, all in Night Shift. Ron Howard movie. Came out on this date in 1982, 44 years ago. Bob Dylan had his infamous motorcycle crash near Woodstock, New York on this date 60 years ago. Prince Charles and Lady Diana married on this date 45 years ago. Private School with Phoebe Cates and Betsy Russell galloping on a horse topless came out in 1983 on this date. So that's a great country or what? Brad Pitt married Jennifer Aniston on this date 26 years ago. That lasted about 5 years. Kid Rock married Pamela Anderson on this date 20 years ago today. That marriage lasted 4 months. Lee Majors married Farrah Fawcett on this date 53 years ago today in 1973. They got divorced 9 years later. Animal House came out on this date in 78. And Mel Gibson, arrested for a DUI with an open bottle of tequila in his car, who then verbally assaulted the arresting officer and launched a tirade against Jews. All of that on this day 20 years ago in 2006. Oh, and I want to say congratulations to Steve Savard. Mike Bush is retiring in a couple of weeks, and Steve Savard, who got bounced out of Channel 4 in an extremely unpopular move by KMOV a couple of years ago, is getting Mike's old gig. So he's going to be the primary anchorman on Channel 5. Steve's a good guy. We say congratulations. And that's it. The weekend pickup. That's how we start the show every Sunday morning here from 7 to 9, the Sunday Showgram on News Talk STL 1019 94.1.
Radio. Who needs a radio? Like what you're hearing? Don't forget JC's Wayback Machine every Saturday night from 6 until 9 on 1019 and 94.1 News Talk STL and the free News Talk STL app.
The name Charles Manson is sort of like using the name Hitler. It's when you need a reference point involving a human being that everybody knows the name of, but is just detestable and it's just awful. Charles Manson. The anniversary is coming up actually next Sunday, August 9th. And even though the Tate LaBianca murders took place in Southern California, a million miles from St. Louis, both geographically and culturally, for that matter, it's incredible when you stop to think there is a very, very strong St. Louis connection to the Manson murders. Now, if for some reason you're on the young end of our demographic and you don't know what I'm talking about, back in 1969, there was a very famous actress by the name of Sharon Tate. She was beautiful and her career was just beginning to blossom, but she had almost a Sydney Sweeney type look to her, and she was just gorgeous. And like a lot of very, very pretty actresses, extraordinarily, unusually beautiful actresses in Hollywood, usually they give them really rotten roles, the stuff that Raquel Welch used to get, where you're just basically eye candy, and they're just trying to get you on a beach or a swimming pool or something like that so they can expose as much of your flesh as possible, and that's what you are to the movie in terms of importance, your window dressing. But as time went on, Sharon Tate started getting better roles, and turns out she also had like a little bit of a comedic flair, and she loved to make people laugh and just to entertain people in general. And as I said, I cannot stress this enough. This woman was beautiful. So one morning, the world is awakened to the fact that there has been a very, very vicious and horrible murder that took place right there in Hollywood. And Sharon Tate, who was something like 7 or 8 months pregnant, was one of the people who was murdered in what had become known as the Tate LaBianca murders. Why? Because then there was another murder, same sort of deal. Really, really gruesome. In fact, the police initially, for whatever reason, didn't connect the two crimes. So it was a, really, really awful, horrible, particularly gross and disgusting crime, and there were terrible things written in blood on the walls and on the mirrors, that sort of stuff. And if you haven't seen the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, make sure you see it. I think that Quentin Tarantino went to the well one too many times on this idea of changing the outcome of a story, changing history, as he did in Inglourious Bastards. Okay, that's sort of a little interesting trick that he pulled in that movie, and for that movie, it was like, okay, that was sort of interesting. But then to come back and do it a couple of years later, same thing where you change the outcome of one of your movies. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is like one of the best movies ever made up until about the last 10 minutes, where I think Quentin Tarantino ruined his own movie. But I digress. So it didn't take long for the cops in Los Angeles to figure out who did it, and they were pretty sure that they had their criminals, their murderers. So they rounded them all up, they put them in jail, but they lacked evidence. They didn't find any guns, they didn't find any material possessions that could be linked back to somebody. Nobody dropped anything, and obviously, it being 1969, you didn't have the research that police departments have now, the research facilities to be able to check, fibers and things like that. And obviously cameras, security cameras weren't around. So the cops had these people, and they were, pretty damn sure they had the right people. In fact, they knew they had the right people, but we don't have any evidence. Or at least we have very little evidence. What we don't have is enough evidence to convict. But based on the charges, they were able to keep all of them in jail, while the police, who were pretty stumped on this whole thing in terms of how are we going to prove this in a court? We just don't have what we need. Now, when they raided the farm where Charles Manson and all of these guys were hanging out, where they had a little ranch, and I mean in the middle of nowhere, just like dirt roads and stuff like that, but that's where they were living, in a commune. And the police went up there, and they're figuring we're gonna find, if nothing else, we're gonna find the bloody clothes. I mean, there was blood all over everything. It was impossible for them to have committed this crime without getting some of this blood all over them. So they've got to have the clothes up there. Well, they go up there and there's no clothes. And there's just a tremendous amount of speculation as what did they do with the clothes? If we had the clothes, we got them. But nobody could figure it out. Nobody could figure out how did they ditch all the clothes? Well, I hope you remember a reporter in St. Louis on Channel 4 for many, many years by the name of Al Wyman. Great guy. He would do the medical stuff for Channel 4, and I shared the newsroom with him for a couple of years. He was just a great guy, very, very interesting guy. Well, lo and behold, he is a general assignment reporter at the ABC television affiliate in Los Angeles in 1969. And one day he's sitting there and just sort of thinking to himself, what did they do with those clothes? How could they have gotten rid of the clothes? And then something just hits him. And he goes to work the next day and he grabs one of the photographers and they hop in the van. And he says, all right, drive over to Sharon Tate's place. And the photographer who was driving said, okay, fine. So they drive over to Sharon Tate's place, the place where the murders took place. And Al Wyman says, all right, now what I want you to do is start driving. And what I'm going to do while you're driving is I'm going to undress. And the photographer driver is probably thinking, oh, so what the hell you are? Not as long as I'm driving this news van. He goes, no. And he explains what he's going to do. So when you're leaving that neighborhood, there's only two ways out. If you go left, it's going to take you into the very, very ritzy parts of L.A. and Bel Air and Beverly Hills and that sort of stuff. If you go right, it takes you north into the San Fernando Valley, and that's, mostly neighborhoods and businesses and movie studios and things like that. And then you go a little further north than that, and you start really getting into, open country. And he thinks to himself, well, if the people who committed these murders were driving, trying to get out of here, they're not going to go left, take it into Beverly Hills. No, they're going to go right back towards their ranch. And so the driver is driving along, and he makes that right turn. And while the driver is driving, Al is undressing in the back of the van. And when he gets right down to his skivvies, he says, all right, stop. And the driver stops. And it just happens to be next to a ravine. So Al puts his clothes back on, had the presence of mind to do that before he got out of the van, puts his clothes back on, and the two of them start going down this ravine, just kicking, high grass and weeds and everything out of the way. And they're just sort of walking down, and lo and behold, Al Wyman stumbles upon the bloody clothes, the creepy crawlies, as they were known. And he knows immediately what he's got here. So you got to remember, again, this is 1969. There was no such thing as a television station being able to say, let's go live to Al Wyman right now because he's got this incredible story. That technology didn't exist. So Al does not disturb the stuff, but he calls the sheriff and he says, look, I found the bloody clothes. I'm going to go on the air with this story. And the police, of course, are going, well, tell us where. I'll tell you where. As soon as I put this story on the air, I'll call you right back and I'll tell you exactly where to go, and you'll find everything. So Al is standing there in front of the scene. Like I said, you go down, and there's a big ravine, and then across the street from the ravine are some houses. So Al, using his best I'm on TV strategy, politely approaches one of the people in his house, explains what's going on, and said, look, I need power. It's dark out, and I don't have any lights. I don't have any way to light myself to be able to put this story on the air live on Channel 7. Do you have a lot of extension cords? And the lady in the house says, yeah, fine. All these extension cords, and they run those out to the area right in front of the ravine so that Al can go on the air, and he puts the story on the air live. And the rest, as they say, is history. The police retrieved the creepy crawlies, the bloody clothes. Now they had their evidence, enough evidence to convict, because now you can sample blood types and match them up to the people who perpetrated the crimes, and you got them. And it was all because Al Wyman, formerly of Channel 4, had an idea. And in the news business, not every swing is a home run. Once in a while, you're going to pop out. This was a walk-off grand slam for your favorite team. The Tate LaBianca Murders, and a pretty darn good movie, as I said, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But The Tate LaBianca Murders, next weekend in 1969. And as you might suspect, it took a very, very long time before people could ever even bring up Charles Manson's name in public, even if you were talking about something awful. But then years later, Tom Snyder, who hosted the Tomorrow Show on NBC, came on after Johnny Carson. He went into the prison and sat down face-to-face and interviewed Charles Manson, and it was almost comical. I still remember Manson had a swastika carved into his forehead. Maybe that's where Quentin Tarantino got the idea in Inglourious Bastards. So anyhow, does everybody remember Gilbert Gottfried? He played the voice of Iago in The Lion King. He was also one of the main players in all of the Hollywood roasts that they do at the Friars Club. And you could be guaranteed that, he was also in The Aristocrats. And you could guarantee that if Gilbert Gottfried was on stage, he was going to say something foul and inappropriate. But sometimes he was just funny. And I don't do a lot of impressions, but I do a decent Gilbert Gottfried. And after that Tom Snyder interview aired on NBC, Gilbert Gottfried, in one of his performances, walked out on stage replicating that famous interview scene between Tom Snyder and Charles Manson, where he said, "Is it hot in here, or am I crazy?"
It's JC's Sunday Showgram on NewsTalkSTL.
Wow, a song named after a girl. There aren't a million of those already.
Name 20.
Rosanna, Roxanne, Michelle, Allison, Sarah, Angie, Brandy, Mandy, Gloria, Cecilia, Maggie May, Jessica, Nancy, Barbara Ann, Billie Jean, Layla, Lola, Polly, Helena, Jenny from the block.
Name 6 more.
Sherry, Laura, Wendy, Maria, Peggy Sue, Minnie the Moocher.
Name 5 more.
Tracy, Jean, Jane, Mary Ann, Eleanor Rigby.
Go f*** yourself.
So this guy calls up his boss and he says, "Boss, I can't come into work today." And his boss says, "What's wrong?" And the guy says, "I have anal glaucoma." His boss says, "What's that?" He says, "I just really can't see my ass coming into work today."
Excuse me, sir, is this the Delta House? Sure. Come on in.
You know, I've been thinking about this. You know what makes people violent? I don't think it's television or films. I think it's alarm clocks because it wakes you up abruptly, puts you in a bad mood. You're irritable, you're cranky. I think you should just wake up naturally with an alarm clock that has a human voice, like, "Come on, buddy, time to get up, pal. You're looking good. You got the whole day ahead of you. Come on, out of bed. Come on, let's go. Up you go. Come on, buddy. Come on. Up you go now. Move it. Let's go. Move it. Move it. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go." Then you hit the snooze alarm. Sorry, buddy. I didn't know what I was talking about then.
Most of us on waking in the morning know exactly where we are. The rooster or the alarm clock brings us out of sleep into the familiar sights, sounds, aromas of home and the comfort of a routine day ahead. Not so with our young friends. This will be a day like none they've ever spent, and they'll spend it in the Twilight Zone.
How you doing, kids? It is Sunday, August 2nd, 2026, are in the Sunday Showgram. We are here on the weekend. Saturday night, we play music from 6 until 9 o'clock. A lot of stuff off the beaten path. It's not just another radio station playing Open Arms by Journey. We play lots of really, really good stuff. You'll have to listen to understand. But that's every Saturday night from 6 until 9 o'clock. And then we come back on Sunday morning and we tell old stories. I spent so much time on the road and backstage at concerts and comedy shows, movie sets. I mean, you name it. All the traveling we did. I've interviewed over 2,500 celebrities over the course of the last 45 years. And so we throw it all at you here on a Sunday morning and we call it the Sunday Showgram. I remember getting the call back in early August of 1982 from a representative from one of the movie studios when I was at DC 101 in Washington, D.C. with Howard Stern, working right across the hallway from me. Howard and I were friends, and then I would see him subsequently at the Grammys every year for many, many years. And then he had a daughter who was going to Wash U, and so he was always at the Ritz in Clayton, staying there when he was in town visiting his daughter. But the call was from one of the movie studios, and they said, hey, we got this new movie. We would like you to screen it. We think it's perfect for your audience. And I said, who's in it? And the guy said, well, Sean Penn. And I said, I've never heard of him. It was 1982, right? I said, who else? They said, Judge Reinhold. Never heard of him. Who else? Forrest Whitaker. Never heard of him. Who else? Jennifer Jason Leigh. Never heard of her. Phoebe Cates. I've heard of her. Okay, that's good enough for me. She usually takes her shirt off. Little did I know. And so we chose to screen it, and on August 6, 1982, at a theater in Chevy Chase, Maryland, we screened Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Speaking of movie premieres, 1993 at the Shady Oak in Clayton, which is no longer there, we did the screening of King of the Hill, which was shot in St. Louis and was a damn good movie, by the way. 1989, on Tuesday's date this week, I was in Atlanta, Georgia for a movie called Heart of Dixie. Ali Sheedy from The Breakfast Club and Virginia Madsen, who was just in her prime back then and looked like $1 million damn bucks in unmarked bills. My gosh. 1990, on tomorrow's date in L.A. for a movie called Air America with Mel Gibson, and it was awful. On today's date in 1993, I started at a radio station called WFXB. It was called The Fox, and it had a rotten signal, but they were going to move the broadcast tower closer to St. Louis, and the signal was going to improve. They never did until after I left 2 years later. The station morphed into The River, which had a pretty good run there for a long time. As long as Sarah McLachlan was putting out albums, the ratings were good, and when she didn't, the ratings sucked. Oh, our buddy Johnny Loverboy Amoroso passed away on Thursday's date back in 2006. If you were a regular listener to some of our old shows back on the Morning Zoo and then later at KSD, the classic rock station, Johnny was a elderly gentleman. He had worked at Barton Hire Wine Company in St. Louis for most of his life. Then he retired and became an umpire for baseball and softball games out at Johnny Mac's in Valley Park. And he was so funny and so crazy, we decided to start inviting him on the show, and it produced moments like this.
What I like to say is when I went with my wife in 1942, I lived next door to her, and I waited 5 years. She was only 14. I had to wait till she got older.
How old were you at the time, John?
About 20.
20, and she was 14? Who do you think you are, Jerry Lee Lewis?
So anyway, I finally got a date from her. I worked hard to get this date.
Where'd you take her?
To the Columbia Theater.
Did you bring her candy, Johnny?
On Southwest.
This is the story.
Did you do the old popcorn trick?
No, I bought a pack of gum. That tea. I know, but so we walked hand to hand. We went to the show, sat in the back row, naturally.
Sat in the back row on the first day with a 14-year-old girl?
No, she was older than that. She was 19 when I dated her.
Oh, 19. So now you're like 30.
30. No.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we walked instead of using my car, and when we got to the show. So
which was unusual because it was a drive-in.
As soon as the show was over, we started to go, we looked, boy, it's raining like hell. My gosh. She says, how are we going to get home? I said, honey, just stay right here. I'll be right back. I flew out of the show, ran down the 5 blocks, got soaking wet, and I brought the car back, and I gave it to her. She said, honey, you're a great guy.
Oh, attaboy.
All right, what a man.
Attaboy.
I thought she had left with somebody else.
And she said, no. And he came back, and she was gone.
Yeah, she was there.
Happy 44th wedding anniversary to you and lover girl.
And she married a war veteran from the World War II, not Civil War.
Wait a minute. This was not the girl you married?
Yeah. So I married her not the Civil War. I don't mean Civil War. World War II.
Wait a minute. Who did the girl that you got at the Columbia Theater that you got all wet for?
Yeah. I married her.
You married her?
Yeah.
But then she married some veteran from the Spanish-American War or something?
The War of 1812?
I don't get it.
No. We got married in 1945. I was still in the service.
And then she married somebody from the Crusades.
And believe you me, I was true blue to that woman. I could have had a lot of dates in the Army, but I didn't take them.
And then she was going to marry David, but Goliath came along.
I was going to say, when William of Hastings conquered Normandy.
I've listened to that tape 100 times, and I still have no idea what the hell he was talking about. All right, coming up next week on Saturday is the anniversary from back in '69, the famous Abbey Road studio photo taken of the boys crossing the street in front of their recording studio. 1986, and the St. Louis Cardinals National League Ball Club had a president who was not a fan of mine. And we kept asking to do things with the team, and they kept saying no. They wouldn't give us the time of day. I think the president's name at the time was Fred Kuhlman, if that sounds correct. And he and Bob Hyland, the overlord at KMOX, were very, very close friends. And so they would have done anything to keep me out of any involvement with the Cardinals. So what we decided to do in 1985 was the first ever JC and the Morning Zoo unauthorized banner night. We just tell everybody to buy a ticket for the game on Friday night and make a banner with either my name or me and the U-Man and DJ or the radio station call letters or just something. And then the bottom of the sixth inning, everybody take out your banners and put them on display. They couldn't stop us. What are they going to do to stop us? We're selling tickets, for God's sakes. And we also told Ernie Hayes, you got to play Louie Louie. Which unbelievably he did, even though they had the volume turned way down. But so sure enough, bottom of the sixth inning, it had to be 100 banners came out. I mean, they were all over the place. And up at KMOX and in the ivory tower of the president of the Cardinals, it was like a scene out of Animal House where Dean Warmer just goes, I hate those guys. Speaking of baseball, first night game at Wrigley Field, 8-8-88. That's next Saturday. I got a whole story about that I'll tell you next week. Oh, also next week, I'm going to plug in for this too. Back in 1994, it was the very first Billy Joel Elton John concert at Busch Stadium outdoors. The very first time they tried to do a concert outside in many, many years at the ballpark. And it was Billy and Elton. And because I was covering it for TV, they allowed me to plug directly into the soundboard for the first two songs. And so I have the only known recording, and a clean recording, in fact, of the very first two songs that they did at that show. And we're going to play them for you next week here on the Sunday Showgram. Next Sunday is also the anniversary from back in 2014 of the Michael Brown killing. I don't know if anybody still commemorates that or if they have any celebration in Ferguson or anything like that. If I said to you, in the average Major League Baseball game, how many baseballs are used? I may have brought this up last week, but I can't remember if I did. I want to make sure I get this story in, though. But if you're sitting there and you watch, if there's a ball in the dirt, it immediately gets thrown out. If I've seen them toss out balls just after a fly ball, and they go, give me the ball, throw it out, put in a new ball. And when you watch a baseball being made, and there are YouTube videos where you can watch it being made, it's astonishing to me that baseballs are as cheap as they are. I think they're only about $8 or $9 a piece right now. When you look at the manufacturing of the balls, all this hand stitching and all this wool and string and rubber core and cork and all that sort of stuff that's in there, it looks like each one of those things should cost about $100 because they're so labor intensive. But they're not. They're under $10 a piece. But anyhow, the number of baseballs used in an average Major League Baseball game, answer, you're way off. 145. And I think I told this story a couple of months ago, but it is the actual anniversary coming up on Wednesday. Back in 1986, 40 years ago, this Wednesday. So Morgan Fairchild is performing, and you got to, 1986, Morgan Fairchild is really, really hot stuff, and she's coming off her great appearance in Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and she was dating Johnny Carson at the time, and she was still in her prime. She still looked really, really good, and she was in town to do some show at the Muni, and so we called over there. Will Morgan Fairchild talk to us? And they said sure. So I went over to the Chase. They set up a little room for us, and I started asking questions. And as I'm talking to her, I notice really how small she is. Because when I walked in, she was already in the chair and with the lights on her and the microphone already run up her shirt and all that sort of stuff. And so I didn't get a chance to really see her stand up. But I just was thinking to myself, wow, you're tinier than I thought. But she was wearing one of those clingy knit tops. And clearly, no visible means of support. But I'm trying to keep my mind on business, and we talk, and we do a very, very fun, upbeat interview. And at the end, I say, Morgan, thank you very much. Would you mind taking we didn't call them selfies back then because that hadn't been invented yet, but can I get a picture with you? Sure, absolutely. And here's where the story starts to get a little funky. So I give the still camera to my photographer, and then I walk around the chair and over to where she is. And I put my arm around her. She stood up, put my arm around her. But two things happened. She stood a lot closer to me than I was expecting. And when I put my arm around her, she was so tiny that my arm went completely around her side. And my hand, the palm of my hand, landed right on one of those massive boobs. And I quickly pulled away, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and she looked at me like, I know that was an accident. She didn't say anything. Very awkward moment. But I said something like, let's try that again. And I put my arm around, and I'll be damned if I didn't do it again. And at that point, I just put my hand down next to my side. They took the picture, and then I just ran.
It's JC's Sunday Showgram on News Talk STL.
The main reason we are able to do these shows on the weekend on 101.9, 94.1 and the News Talk STL app is because of our buddy Skip Weber at Weber Chevrolet. In the interest of full disclosure, we are recording this particular segment on Thursday morning, so by the time this airs on the weekend, some of the stuff may be moot. That having been said, any trades that you would anticipate the Cardinals making, any trades that you would like to see them make, and who would you be willing to give up, who would you not be willing to give up? It does look like Dustin May is gone.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you're in a rebuilding year, you don't expect to be contending. Okay, so the whole thing was to get younger, to stock the farm system, and we've done both those things. But in the meantime, we were playing very well, mainly thanks to Jordan Walker. I mean, let's face it, with his production, that to remove that production, and we're not a bad team, but we're a shadow of what we are. So anyway, going into the All-Star break, or a little bit before that, I thought, here's the toughest stretch we got. We got Atlanta, we got Chicago, we got Milwaukee, we got Atlanta again. I mean, if we come out of that and we're still in one or two away from the wild card, or even in the wild card position, then I think we're going to be. We need to go for it. We need to say, yes, we've been rebuilding, but let's get some pieces for the future, but also for the present, and go for it, because anything can happen in the playoffs. Okay, we all know that. Team gets hot, or some batters get hot, or a pitcher gets hot. Let's do it. Well, since then, it looks like we can't score any runs, and we're getting beat by everybody in every type of possible way. So I got to think that maybe you just keep the plan of this is a rebuilding year, and you don't give away any of your prospects for the present, and you just keep, if you want to give away, we don't really have much in the way of veterans other than Newt Bar that will plug into places, Dustin May maybe. But JC, I don't know. You just don't stand pat. I mean, if something falls in your lap, because we did all of our unloading of our veterans for our farm system, we have a lot of good stuff happening at Triple and Double A on both the pitching mound and in the field and in the batter's box. I mean, we've got an outfielder that's tearing it up. So maybe you do trade Newt Bar. I love Newt Bar. I have his replica jersey that I wear. But he's the oldest in the outfield, and if you're going to make room for this guy who's going to be coming up, then maybe you do trade him. I don't know. I don't know that we have a solution at third base. Nolan Gorman wasn't it. The Rock is not it, so at least yet. So maybe a third baseman, but honestly, I think I kind of expect them to stand pat because they are rebuilding. You don't want to give up 3 or 4 guys in the minor leagues for a star that may. Now, if you can sign that guy, a la what we did with Matt Holliday back in the day for the future, and he's still a relatively young guy and he might help you, that's another story.
Well, people keep asking me, what do you think is going to happen? And I keep giving the same answer. Chaim Bloom is brand new in this position, and we knew the tendencies of Walt Jocketty. We knew the tendencies of John Mozeliak.
Right.
We don't know the tendencies of Chaim Bloom, so I don't know how people think they can predict what he's going to do.
Well, I think that once again, though, but you got to be if you try to think like a robot, where you're not saying, "Man, I want the Cardinals to win," and you hope the Cardinals win the World Series every year. April 1st, we never would have predicted. Very, very, very few people would have predicted that we were over 500. We were expecting to be terrible all year and just get through, the season, get experience for all these young guys. I mean, that's kind of what we all. If you weren't thinking that, I think you're lying. Or otherwise, you're just way more prophetic than I am. I mean, I didn't want them to be that way. Super pleasantly surprised that they're playing as well as they are, except for the last 10 games. But that being said, that's the plan. The game plan for the season was to rebuild this year and be ready to kick some butt in the future. And I don't know. Once again, 10 games ago, I was ready to change that some. But we just went into a mini swoon. I don't really want to mortgage anything from the original plan. Now, if they do something, I'm rooting for them no matter what, okay? I still want them to make the playoffs. I mean, for Pete's sake, in 2006, we traded people away and put people like Rafael Belliard. I mean, we thought we were done then, too. And next thing you know, boom, we are Ronnie Belliard, but whatever. We are, we won the World Series that year, even after we traded some people. So, I mean, anything can happen. But I don't have any predictions because I kind of expect us to stand pat. Now this is probably the weekend, and we made 3 blockbuster deals, and I look like an idiot. But if that's the case, don't play this interview, and I'll sponsor the show anyway.
Well, thank you for that. I know you're disappointed, but are you surprised that the crowds still aren't really back?
I'm not that surprised. I am still disappointed. The problem is that so many people, such a big part of our crowds is the people that come from out of town. I think I read something years ago, and this could be wrong, but so forgive me, but it's something like a third of the crowd at any given night is from further than 100 miles away. Yeah.
On the weekends, it's more than half.
Yeah. Okay. So the point is, when you expect the team to be terrible and be rebuilding, a lot of these people in Springfield, Illinois, Springfield, Missouri, Peoria, Little Rock, wherever, that are planning their summer trips, they probably said, let's sit out the Cardinals this year. So they didn't get their tickets for those years. They didn't plan. They did something else. And maybe they were kicking themselves. They said, you know what, this June it would have been nice to have gone up there. They're playing pretty well. But they didn't plan it. And so those kinds of trips and those kinds of attendance can't be done on the spur of the moment. We lost a lot of that. Is there enough people to fill the stadium around that? Yeah, probably. But, professional sports is not quite as live attendance orientated as it used to be. Everybody's watching it. They can stream it. They can, they watch it on TV through a number of ways, So I'm not that surprised when we're still out attending a lot of the normal people that we do, but we're not selling out because we're not getting that out of town fan like we usually did.
All right, shifting gears, the 45th anniversary of the debut of MTV is this weekend, and you're going to have to back up on me here and tell me about how old you were in 1981, but I really picture you as one of those kids who came home from school, went right to the cable TV, boom, directly to MTV.
I hate to disappoint you, but we didn't even have cable.
Oh, that's right.
I did not watch MTV at all when it first came out. Now, I had a couple friends. I remember early on going to a girlfriend's house, and we weren't really, super serious, but I really liked her, but she was like, yeah, cool, more like a friends thing, but maybe slightly more than that. But anyway, she invited me to her house after school to watch videos. And I'm going, what the heck does that mean? I mean, I didn't even really know. And this is not day one. This is a few months in. This is like in October or September after it's been running for a bit. And so I kind of liked it. But JC, let's be honest, okay? I'm 16 years old, all right, at the time, and I'm a rock and roller. All right. Now, I'm a pretty decent guy, I think. I got decent morals, good grounding. But a 16-year-old rock and roller is kind of a jerk musically. If it's not rock and roll, it's terrible. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I was not a fan of Madonna. I was not a fan of Cyndi Lauper. I was not a fan of Michael Jackson. I mean, I can appreciate their music now, especially because I listen to it and it takes me back to those days. But in those days, I didn't want to watch, Madonna on Material Girl or Girls Just Want to Have Fun. I mean, I didn't want to listen to that kind of music, okay? That's because I was, a 16-year-old rock and roll guy, jerk, music snob.
And Rush wasn't doing MTV videos.
Exactly. There wasn't many videos about the trees or free will and stuff like that, yeah. So I can tell you this. What turned me back to MTV really nicely was the song New Year's Day. I was a big U2 fan, and when I caught that video, I go, man, this is a great video. I love this. I like the song even better because of that. So it kind of got me more interested in it. And when I was in college, we watched them all the time, so it was cool. But initially, it took me a couple of years to get into it. We didn't have it to begin with, so I saw it at friends' houses or wherever, and there was too much stuff that I didn't like as much.
And everybody knows the trivia question, the first song was The Buggles. The one that stumps people is what the second song was. Do you have any idea?
I used to know that. Was it something by the Pretenders?
It was Pat Benatar, Treat Me Right.
Okay, close enough.
Yeah.
Chrissy Hine, Pat Benatar, yeah.
Right.
No,
and if you want to know the third song, you're out of luck. Go to the library. Okay, we are crossing over until the month of August, and when we were kids, obviously it was like September, October, and the new car models would come out, and it was a very, very big deal, the unveiling, and you would have the auto shows, and all of that has changed so dramatically. That having been said, for people who are looking for 2027s, what can you tell them?
So we've got a few vehicles that are 2027s on both Ford and Chevy, a little bit more Chevy. Those vehicles, here's the thing about that. You don't have very high incentives on those. Equinox we've had out for a couple months already, so they're starting to get some incentives. But what you do get is if, we can interest you in leasing a vehicle, which some people do. This is the best time to lease a vehicle because when you lease, you pull out a certain amount of money based on of what it's going to be worth down the line. They call that the residual. Well, the very first day of the new model year is the highest residual because a 2027 is going to be worth the same whether you buy it in October or August or next March. So by the time it gets to March, those residuals on the 27s are going to be very, very much smaller than today because it's a newer vehicle. You're looking at 3 years from now. It's a higher they pull out more vehicle and pull out more money. So that makes your lease payment lower. So this is the time to get the best lease payments of the year on Chevrolets or Fords. It also is the time to get the highest incentives typically on the 2026s. Because the factory is interested in all the dealers clearing out the lot to make room for the 27s. So, most of the incentives are about the same as they've been running, but a few things get ticked up a little bit, a little bit more. Downside of that is their selection has gone down considerably from where it was at the beginning of the summer. So you got to hope you find exactly what you like, but your incentives are a little bit higher. So those are kind of the best of both world crossover right now.
All right. Weber Chevrolet, 3 locations, Granite City, Columbia, Illinois, Olive 270, and online at WeberChevrolet.com. Ford dealership in Metro East as well. Skip, have a great week. We'll talk to you in a couple of days. Thanks. Real good example of some of the songs we play on Saturday night on JC's Wayback Machine. That airs Saturday nights from 6 until 9 o'clock. And instead of just playing the same old songs over and over and over again, what we do is we just completely set aside the 350 songs that just seem to get played over and over and over and over again on St. Louis radio, which is run by the corporations, and they're not even in St. Louis. They're hundreds of miles away. And so what we do, because we can, is on Saturday nights, we dig deeper. Last night, for example, I played Roll Over Beethoven, a version by Eric Clapton and George Harrison. Low Spark or High Heeled Boys, but a live acoustic version by Steve Winwood. Save Me by Amy Mann, Counting Blue Cars, Dishwalla, Just Like Heaven, The Cure. California by Joni Mitchell. What a great song. Old 55 by the Beatles. And then we put in a celebrity interview or two, and we have a great time.
Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll.
That's how it sounded exactly 45 years ago today when MTV launched on your cable TV. You know, from a radio perspective, we were scared to death because everybody was telling us it was going to put the radio business out of business. That turned out, obviously, not to be the case. But it was a little scary there for a while because everybody was talking about it. Of course, everybody knows the answer to the trivia question, what was the first song played on MTV, which was the Buggles. But a great question is, what was the second song? I'll only tell you it was a Pat Benatar song. You can look it up. Back in the early 90s, the television station sent me up to New York to knock around and interview all the people from MTV, which is what I did. I still remember we thought that Kurt Loder, the guy who did the news, was ancient because at the time he was 47 years old. He was probably 25 years older than anybody else in the building. Walking into the place was sort of funny because they were all having such a great time, but they took their jobs very seriously. But I still remember in the lobby, they had one of those revolving Lazy Susan type things that they have in some businesses where you walk in, and in a glass cylinder, they have all of their awards that they've gotten. But in this particular case, you walked in, and instead of awards, they had cakes in there. Like it was a bakery. The place where they did all the studio work, frankly, was sort of a dump. But a lot of TV studios are. They look really, really nice when it's on camera, but all you have to do is go about 2 feet off camera, and it just looks like a shed or something. Our buddy Smash was an MTV VJ for one entire summer, and in one of the great stories ever, and by the way, I should point out that when MTV put together their 100 most memorable moments from the heyday of MTV, checking in number 44 was Smash, because he had this great idea. He had Guns N' Roses in the studio, and he was interviewing them, but Smash had heard that they were going to build a brand new set for them to do all of their interviews and all their on-camera work. So he checked with somebody, and they said, sure, go ahead, do it. It'll be cool. So what they did is they let Guns N' Roses destroy the place. I mean, just like with sledgehammers and stuff. They tore the entire MTV set apart while Smash was just sitting there calmly, and people were like, oh my God, they're ripping the place apart. Little did they know that it was all part of the plan because they were getting a brand new set. But the people watching didn't know that, which made it even more cool. Volumes have been written about the issue of black music being played on MTV because the original plan was to do rock and roll, but MTV became such a powerful force in the music industry, you could make or break acts based on whether or not they got any time on MTV. And there wasn't really any place carved out for black music acts. And so some of the movers and shakers in the black community and the activists and stuff like that walked in and basically said, you're going to put some black music acts on this channel or we're going to make life miserable for you. And at the time, it was not well received by the management at MTV. I mean, think about it. They were not playing any Michael Jackson songs. And at the time, whether you liked it or not, and I certainly didn't, the biggest music act in the world at that time was Michael Jackson. He's not getting any airplay on MTV. But they worked it all out. It was interesting that this new thing that had popped up on your cable TV was supposed to put all of the people in radio out of business. We're still here. And they are too, but it ain't the way it was. Not at all. Which brings us to the issue of Kennedy, not one of the original MTV VJs. And by the way, Alan Hunter, little blonde guy, you probably already know this, but he married a St. Louis gal, and they live in Kirkwood, right around from the Deweys. Don't go to the house, okay? Don't go to the house. Anyhow, for almost the entire time of its heyday, MTV was a very, very liberal hangout. And then came Kennedy, who was unapologetically conservative. Now, we had her on the air face-to-face one year at the Grammys in New York. She was very cute, and I was sort of hitting on her a little bit. I think she had other things in mind. But then a couple of years after that, they set up a phone conversation with us, and we talked to and reminisced with MTV VJ Kennedy.
There you were, rubbing elbows with all the big music stars and celebrities of the day. But there were also, those millions of kids out there, many of them in small towns, a lot of them having trouble fitting in.
The point was for kids who especially, didn't have somewhere to go, that if they were going to watch MTV, to feel like they were a part of something. Like, we never wanted it to be something where we thought we were better than the viewers, because we didn't. We were screwing around as much as anyone. And we wanted you to feel like this was the greatest party thrown by the most popular person you knew, and you were invited.
It's JC's Sunday Showgram on NewsTalkSTL.
All of that 45 years ago this week. And, of course, the Buggles with song number 1. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. We'll talk to you again next Saturday night and next Sunday morning. In the meantime, we've beaten this one to death. Have a good one. See you later.
Could you tell me... Bye-bye. I'm sorry, what? What part didn't you understand? The buh or the bye? Bye-bye.
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 How strange. I swear she said bye-bye, yet I still see your mouth flapping. I want to see motion, movement, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay?
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Bye-bye.
I don't get it.
There's nothing to get. Bye-bye. Hi, what are you listening to?
Hits from the 70s.
Whoa, the 70s. I love the 70s. Aw, bye-bye. Ding, 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 ding. Say bye. Bye-bye. Do the bye-bye. Do the bye-bye. That's the way bye-bye, I like it.
Okay,
Bye-bye,
show's over, folks.
Bye-bye.
Let's move.
The JC Corcoran Podcast.